You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy. Sandra, welcome to the Modern People Leader. How's your week going so far?
I've been having a fantastic back to work week almost. My kids are back in school. I'm back at work in the office and it's been feeling really great.
Yeah, it's been this is like our Monday. We had Labor Day yesterday off. If I sound a little bit slow, it's because I am. But no, we're really excited for this. We start every episode with a tradition that we call Good News Stories. So we all share something personal or work related from the past week or two, just to kick things off in a fun way. And we like for our guests to go first. So if you have something, please jump in.
Fabulous. I'll start with a personal one because it's a big win for me. Some of you who will listen will know this. I'm a very proud single parent of 2 kids. And one of them had a massive school change that was happening last week. And for those of you who have kids will know school changes are not easy. You leave your friends behind, you leave everything you know behind. And as a parent, you're kind of hoping that you made the right decision. And it's an impactful one. And I think it's the best decision I've made. I have a happy, curious and engaged child skipping home from school and going to school, which is the best thing I could have hoped for. So that's my biggest success.
Steven, you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, that's relatable. School started in Austin, Texas a couple weeks ago. People ask like, oh, how are you doing? It's like, great. Like I get the structure of knowing exactly what the schedule is going to be. And my oldest daughter, I co-parent, and my oldest daughter, she just started high school. So everything is like even more awkward now. And there's like things that used to be so simple, like whether or not she should take her soccer cleats to school is now like a big thing. And like, will she be embarrassed for walking around with cleats? It's like, so I get it. I totally get it. My good news is we got to take a break from all of that. And to Daniel's point, it was Labor Day holiday this weekend, and we drove 8 hours, which is not the first thing I want to do my holiday weekends. But we knocked out 2 national parks in 2 days. And so we drove to the mountains. Yes, there are mountains in Texas. I found them near the border with New Mexico. So essentially there's one national park on the Texas side, and on the New Mexico side, there's Carlsbad Caverns. And we knocked them both out, and it was amazing. Nice to disconnect from the things and spend some time in nature. So my buckets are full. Awesome. That's my good news.
Well, my weekend wasn't quite as exciting as yours, Steven, but I guess, it's a big weekend here in Austin, Texas, which is the first football game of the season for the Longhorns. And so that's my good news. The first game was this past Saturday. We won 52-0. That was probably the first shutout that I've seen, I don't know, maybe like in 15 years. It's been a long time since our team has been this good. So that's really exciting. It's a little bit more fun when your team is actually going to maybe compete for a championship versus the last 10 years we've been pretty bad, with the exception of last year. So that's my good news.
So I want to talk today is really about you, Sandra. And we know that you have done some amazing things throughout your career. And my favorite question, I call it the Brene Brown question, is like, tell us your story. Like, walk us through your career and how that led to you joining Index Ventures, doing all the cool things that you guys are doing.
I have a bit of an unusual story. I wouldn't say entirely unique, but I don't think there are a lot of people like me because I grew up in East Germany, but my mom fled with me in the 1980s. So I saw East Germany and West Germany when the wall was still up and became a refugee. And I think it honed my understanding and interest into figuring out what people are really meaning when they say things, because I couldn't really understand it. The cultural context was missing, and it taught me how to adapt and fueled a really deep desire to make sure that diverse voices are heard, and particularly those who are normally not heard. I had the travel bug because of that experience of having been in a closed society. And so went to the US in high school, had to go back to Germany. I think the day I graduated high school, left for France, didn't speak a word of French, managed to get myself into a French university and study there and complete it, and was a bit lost as what I wanted to do, and was lucky to have a lot of offers. And I asked one of my mentors, what offer should I pick? And he said, I don't know, you need to figure that one out on your own. And I picked the wrong offer. I picked the one that sounded really interesting and had a great title attached to it and prestige and money. And I hated it from day one. Hated it. I think they also realized relatively quickly that I was probably not going to be the best culture fit for the organization. And so I went back to the mentor and said, how do I get out of here? And he was at the time the CEO of an organization. He said, I'm not one to tell you what to do, but why don't you pretend to be a journalist and write about the young professional trap and figure out how do people actually end up in the careers they're in? And as you can tell, I love people and I love hearing people's stories. So I spoke to probably 100 people over the course of a year. And kind of every time they were telling me their story, I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. Oh man, this is so boring. I wouldn't want to be here. And through that, met a headhunter who said one day, hey, I have this crazy job. It just, the description sounds like you, but it's probably nothing you would have ever heard about. And it was to join career service at INSEAD, the business that has campuses in France and in Singapore and now also in the Middle East. And it was the perfect role. It was really the candidate description when I was reading it. It was me. It's help other people figure out what to do with their lives, advise them on career in tech, nonprofit, and finance. And so I kind of started on a totally different journey, joining INSEAD. For those of you who don't know, it's the most diverse educational organization you can think of. 86 nationalities. None of them make up more than 10% of the entire class. And so it's real representation of the world. And relatively quickly became the director of career services. Was always wondering why some people made the most incredible career changes and others really struggled with seemingly easy ones. So I did my executive master in organizational psychology at INSEAD, wrote about the psychological barriers you need to overcome when you're changing careers, and kind of went on to prove a point. I got hired as a chief people officer in George Soros' biggest, his foundation. So it's the vehicle that owns and distributes his money, where they needed a total rebuild of reimagining what the people function could be like, experienced how difficult it is to bring change to an organization and to lead a people function. And through that, relocated to New York, came to London, became a parent, became a single parent, and kind of was at the point where I was like, do I really want to be a people leader or do something else? And I still have so many interests. So a headhunter hired me to come into their tech and board practice. I did that for a while. I didn't like the transactional nature as I felt it of headhunting, though I love my colleagues and they're absolutely fabulous. And then somebody called me during COVID when I was least expecting it and said, hey, there's a VC fund looking for someone. We heard you love building networks. And I said, if it's VC, no, thank you. But that's just not me. It's just not who I am. And they were a great headhunter because they said to me, why don't you go out and figure out what Index is all about before you say no? And I'm clearly here. So there was clearly a story that the market told me that I also found with every single person I met. And so, yeah, that's how I got to where I am today.
I love this story. And I guess pick up where you just left off. Like, what is your day-to-day at Index?
Every VC defines what the talent role looks like very differently. And I feel very fortunate to be in an organization where everything revolves around people. I think every decision Index takes has something to do with the people. So there's a deep appreciation and understanding of the added value of the talent organization. And we really, when you look about our organization, how many portfolio companies we have this scaled artisan approach. So every single one of us who works here really wants to offer almost like as if we're uniquely working just with this one organization type experience while working with a multitude of places and founders. My main role is to work with our founders as they're embarking on their kind of like Series B plus journey. So it's what we call the messy middle in scaling through chaos. It's the phase that is incredibly complicated and complex because you've proven you have a product, you've hired some great people, you clearly continue to attract great investment, but now is the moment where scaling will become really scary. Right? You're going to double headcount every year. You're going to have to go into new markets. You're launching new products. You're going to think about like, where do you want to grow? And as a founder, you will have to grow faster than anybody else because all of a sudden you're attracting people who have so much more experience than you most of the time. And you have to learn how to be a leader of these people and how to manage a more complex board. And so I work with them on in an advisory capacity of how do you do that? What does great look like? How do we connect you to the right people who can help you solve some of your talent issue? And then around me, I have a wonderful group of colleagues who work with earlier stage founders or who work like Katie in the US and do the same role over there.
As a former HR tech founder, like what for those watching the video, like you'll see me nodding my head because like, so, the things that you said, doubling headcount, launching new products, all the headaches that are involved with, just those two items there. And there's a lot more on the founder's plate. You just mentioned something that our audience is going to hear a lot of during this conversation, and that is scaling through chaos. So what exactly is scaling through chaos, and why is it relevant to the HR leaders that may be listening into this episode?
So for those of you who know Index, we're incredibly excited about a lot of the really difficult topics founders face. And we often think about how do we ensure that the ecosystem becomes better? And so a lot of the things we do and research and the guides we publish are really open source for anybody. Because if the ecosystem becomes better, then there will be even more founders that will have exciting business opportunities and will create those. So we've, over the time, and I think it's by now 4 books and 3 apps that we have launched, I have always had this approach of thinking about what are the big people topics that are important for founders that they need to get back. One of them is compensation. So we have a guide on how to build your equity plans, and we have a tool that founders and people leaders can use to build equity plans and to think about what equity means. Attached to that is a whole campaign to help governments understand how important employee ownership and equity is. And I think we calculated over the last couple of years, over 5 billion euros have gone into the hands of employees in Europe due to changes that were a direct impact of the work we've been doing. We have guides on how you scale internationally. So how do you go from Europe to the US and from the US to Europe? Because that's an critical questions people have. And then say for the last 15 years, we've been collecting the same kind of questions and topics over and over from founders. They were grappling with the same problems. But we don't like to just put out anecdotes. We like data. And until about 3 years ago, we couldn't have access to data to help us think about how does a company actually scale from 0 to 1,000. And that unlocked about 2 years ago when we managed to get our hands on a data set that represents the first 1,000 employees of the 210 most iconic tech businesses of the last 20 years. And when we had that, we could kind of test our hypotheses, like what is actually the reality? How did these companies grow? How did they tackle all those different questions? And we went out to 70 plus operators and founders to think about, okay, how did you really do it? Like, give us some examples. And what you get as a result is a book that is in both physical copy, but also on the website for those who can't get their hands on the physical one. And it's seen as a guide. It's really not meant as you have to read all of it in one go and then you have to do everything. But it kind of gives you here are the things that will happen to you as a founder as you're scaling your organization from 0 to 1,000. And here's how different people have done it. And here's what the data tells us. And so it allows you to figure out what's your own path and how do you sustain, how we call it, like the surfing on the edge of chaos is probably what combines and what makes all of these founders really successful. They're just about skimming it. And then they go on and start building something else. And then they skim it again. So it kind of ebbs and flows.
Surfing on the edge of chaos. I'm going to start using that. So I guess speaking of the data, in scaling through chaos, it's mentioned that a successful founder typically spends 30 to 45% of their time on hiring and then another 10% on onboarding. That's about half of their time dedicated to HR-related tasks. That was pretty surprising for me. Was that pretty surprising for y'all when y'all started to dig into the data?
I think if you ask people leaders and talent leaders, they will all say, that's what it should be. It's not necessarily the reality, but it was really interesting to have data that confirmed it's consistently 50%. How they spend their time in this 50% shifts from the very early stages to really the latter stages. I mean, very early on, you're the one who's still building and you're hiring at the same time, and you're probably like the chief hiring officer at that moment. Then you go much more into the building and bringing people in the organization. And then it becomes like, how do you manage through others? How do you get your vision through? How do you storytell in the market? And so the role of the founder shifts and where they spend their time, but it's consistently 50%. What we found quite interesting is there a number of founders have come back to us, both within our portfolio and outside, and have said, I had no idea that's the amount of time I should be spending. I'm spending two hours a week on people things. And they shifted their approach to how they structured their weeks. and have gotten results as a kind of consequence of doing that. So it clearly pays off to spend that much time on any kind of people issues.
Well, I think structure is really, really important because it'll enable focus. And when there's so much to do, you've got to have that structure and you got to have that focus, in my experience, because once you start waver a little bit and your structure crumbles, they're not good outcomes, some pretty significant consequences. What's fascinating to me about this data is that that's more at the macro level. So if we dig into this a little deeper, to truly achieve greatness, this level of commitment's really, level of commitment to people and people HR related tasks is really required of the entire company. So I get the point that HR leaders feel like, yeah, that is where the time should be spent. Because there was another data point that I saw, and it was around hiring of engineering talent. And the data indicates that conversion rates for engineering hires is around 6%, which means a startup might need to have somewhere around 400 touch points, let's say, just to hire 4 engineers. That was like, wow, that when you think about the touch points, and that's not just the CEO, that's the rest of the team, hiring for culture, technical, taking them through the candidates through the technical exercises. That's a lot of time. And so how do you, when it is not working, or when you see with your portfolio companies that culture maybe isn't there for hiring greatness, at least, what do you do? What's the feedback to the founder? How does that get to a founder that they maybe need to spend a little more time in these areas? Or just as it relates to hiring engineering talent, like how does Index come in and kind of help with these things?
I think the key is like, how do we come in and help? The help needs to be wanted from the other side. One of the things I really appreciate about working here is it's not a forced conversation on a founder, and it's a conversation anybody has. Our investors are having these conversations. This is not a talent team conversation. This is anybody who's on the board who talks with founders and coming from founders. I must say most of the time, it comes from the founders to us relatively quickly. When they're figuring out that they're struggling to have a good hiring pipeline, when they don't quite know what to do. So we work with them from the beginning and really even pre-seed stage to help them think through what's the organizational culture you might want to build. Who are the people who have done this successfully that we can connect you to so that you can start learning, particularly when it comes to roles that they might not be familiar with, or at the later stages of roles that they might not be familiar with. What does great look like? How do you hone your understanding of what questions to ask in an interview process and what to look for? And then how do you structure your time? Because in the beginning, your time really is about finding the right people and starting to build product, while at the same time not overhiring. There's a little bit of a danger early on, particularly as you have been successfully fundraising, to hire too many people too quickly and not to know how to onboard them. So when we think about engineering in particular, what we found through the research is like for every technical hire, you have to have 15 active candidates. So that means that your sourcing pipeline needs to be quite big, and you're probably looking at 40 interviews in total. So the more time we spent with founders up front to help them think through, what is a hiring process? How do I start sourcing? What's an employer brand? I mean, for some of them, it's really new. For some of them, it is really something they have done before. And then kind of figuring out, where can I find these people? First, I think approach is like, let me ask the people I know and see who they can refer. But there's other ways they can expand out through recruitment, through having an in-house recruiter. And so by the time I'd say you get to a certain number of hires, probably like 15 plus for the year, you really need to think about hiring somebody who can do the process for you and who can make sure it's driven through. Because a lot of those early touch points with candidates, even if they end up saying no, might result in a hire later on, and your employer brand starts from that day.
So you've mentioned a couple things that I wanted to drill in on. So first, I want to go back to something you said a little while ago about how once you created this awareness amongst founders that they should be spending more time on people-related tasks, or at least the best founders have done this historically. I guess like once they know that and they know that they need to restructure their weeks, what does this new structure look like? Are there, examples of past founders that you've worked with that you give them like, hey, here are 4 or 5 successful founders that we've worked with. Here's how they were structuring their time around this stage for their company?
Really depends on the situation. That's why we like not being prescriptive with our founders and telling them, here's the model and then you should just do it and then you're successful, because it doesn't work that way. But I think it becomes a very personal reflection on, first of all, how much time do you need to figure out what you will need this year to build? And we try and tend to get them to think about the next 2 years. Like, what does my organization need to look like in 2 years if we're going on the scaling path and doubling headcount every couple of months or later on? What kind of skills do I already have in the organization, and what kind of complementary spikes do I need to bring in so that when I go out to market, I can hire the right people at the right time? And I think a very important thing as well, because it takes so long, not just to hire, but to onboard, there's a danger that you're doing just that and not actually building your product. And so figuring out, how do you find enough balance? And different people do that in different ways. Some founders like to reserve certain hours in the week. Every Friday afternoon, the entire team gets together. In the beginning, maybe 2 people, later on, maybe 10 people. And they really think about, how do we reach out to the best people? How do we figure out who the best people are? It's about figuring out also how you're really smart in your interview process. What kind of questions are you going to ask them? Like, what are you really looking for? And not having this long list of all the attributes you could find in a candidate, but what do you really need in the person? As you scale, I think thinking about who are the people who must be involved in the recruitment process to check for culture, and who are the people who are the decision makers, like making it very clear. And then things evolve over time and people shift things in different ways. But those are just some of the things that we've seen founders do successfully. The other thing I would say is they're very fast learners and figuring out what great looks like. So where can I find experts who have done this before? Who are the best CTOs who can advise me? Who can they connect me to? I have one founder, every single onboarding meeting, the first meeting, they spend an hour with the person saying, like, who have you worked with, who your boss's boss, or people who were out of your scope that you would absolutely die to have in an organization again? Can you connect me to them? Can we meet them? Can you introduce me? So you can use almost your new employees as a funnel for future talent and sourcing.
That's what I love about the ecosystem that you're describing to me, is things are data driven. And I agree, there's no silver bullet for culture. There's no silver bullet for scaling a startup. You can try the same exact tactics, it's kind of like kids. You can try to parent the same exact way and you're going to get different results. But there is data that points to an approach that should work at scale if you follow certain steps. And one of the data points that you shared with us during our prep meeting was that if by leveraging a referral-based system, your conversion rates will almost double, which means the time spent on the touches during the recruiting process is halved. And that's time that you get back for things like ensuring you're building the right product, ensuring that you have the right roadmap, ensuring that you're reducing the barriers for your customers to use said functionality and products. So I think that, and we believe that referral programs, even like internal talent mobility programs, are tools that are underused. And so do you have any other effective strategies you guys have as part of your toolkit?
I have an anecdotal response to the referral program, because I often get asked, like, how much should we pay for a referral, or what's the kind of like, how do we incentivize people to do it? I have a founder who did an experiment and set the referral bonus between 0 and I believe it was something like $8,000-9,000, and had the same result. So it wasn't actually about paying people to refer. It was really about telling the story and getting people incredibly excited and engaged so that they wanted to be part of growing the organization and bringing the right ones in. My biggest watch out for referral programs is the lack of diversity that often comes hand in hand with it. So you need to be very deliberate about it. Like the number of times I see relatively non-diverse teams and founding teams at the beginning set out and just ask their friends and ask their former colleagues, and every single person they hire looks just like them. So I'm a big fan in figuring out very early on, what are the competencies that they have plenty of, and where do they spike, and what are the things they still need, and then to deliberately look for people that are different. Which means when you're asking for referrals, or when you're asking people for, hey, can you think about somebody in your network who can do XYZ job? When they start giving you names and profiles, very quickly scan them and ask them, this is great. Can you think of somebody who has a different kind of experience or background? Or have you come across somebody who's done something totally different to what you have ever seen before, just to ensure that you build that diversity into your team from the beginning?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great call out. Okay, so we have a lot of other things we want to get through, And one of the ones that I'm really excited to talk about, and it's something we've been talking about a lot in the show over the last, I guess, year. I mean, wow, can't believe the year's already flown by, but is AI. It's something that gets brought up on almost every episode. I think some HR leaders have are maybe a little bit more advanced and further along that like maturity curve of how they're using it on their team. But I'm curious, like, from your perspective with the founders that you're working with, when it comes to leveraging AI for people related things, like where are most of them? Is it kind of everywhere? And where are you trying to get them?
So we're still in infancy when it comes to really deploying AI and understanding how to deploy it in the right way. And in Europe, I can think of one company that very publicly talks about how they've deployed AI inside their organization everywhere. So whether that is to reduce their marketing or customer services team and to have more efficiency, to really think about how do we structure processes in ways that people can work smarter, but we have fewer people and therefore we will be more cost efficient. It's definitely something when we launched Scaling Through Chaos, it was the first question I think we got. It's like, what about AI and how will AI change how companies scale and the size of different teams? And we just don't have the answers yet. If I look at the people function, for me, there's like three big buckets of like elements that you can think about. One is definitely talent acquisition recruitment. You can think about how you enhance your sourcing, your process, making sure your job descriptions are written in the right way, making sure your candidate touch points are done in the right way. There's a lot of enhancement. So it's really AI as an enhancement tool. And for that, a lot of organizations are really just starting to experiment. They're trying different tools, whether that is one that helps them take notes and synthesize their notes afterwards, whether that's ones that really schedules everything, whether that's one that really captures the data and helps them predict like which candidate will move through faster. We will see whether that will lead to better outcomes or not. There's a second bucket that is much more about the performance management of your organization and predicting where people will be able to go into a different role, where you can leverage a skill set that you might not have seen. And tied to that, I would say, almost the learning and development flow. And then the last element, I think, is more in the organization. How does the people function use self-service and AI as a kind of like almost like an HR co-pilot to help the organization and their employees become more efficient and do things. So whether that is through, scanning your receipts in a way that they immediately go where they have to go, or asking questions to a chatbot rather than having to talk to somebody about how many vacation days do I have left. I think those are all things that HR leaders are still experimenting with, but I would say adoption is relatively low. About half of the people leaders I talk to in more mature businesses are already in a place where they have deployed it. A lot of them are saying, we're looking into it, we're trying to learn, and we're trying to get smarter. It's
really interesting. Sorry, I'm going to take us a bit off track here because it's interesting to be an early stage founder. Again, I can't get away from this lifestyle. So Daniel and I are creating a media and marketing business with the Modern People Leader. And I have created a SaaS business before that and a services company before that, consulting. So like true services. And this business was the fastest to revenue of any of my businesses. And the things that Daniel and I can do on our own, just two co-founders with Gen AI, some days I'm just like, how did I get all that done today? This would have been weeks in a prior life. And so that's like one existence. And the other existence is we interview HR leaders at least once a week, sometimes up to 3 times a week. We've talked a lot about this topic. In fact, I got so obsessed with this earlier this year, I threw 2 HR AI summits. And, we were on a call with Katie Burke, former chief people officer at HubSpot this past Friday. And she was like, yeah, not a lot of progress has been made in terms of HR leaders deploying AI solutions within organizations. And so that just feels off to me somehow. It's hard to explain. And I know those two worlds, like everything is stage specific. I get that. And Daniel and I are still very early on. So we should be doing things on our own. But it just, I don't know what your reaction to that is, but it feels like a weird existence to be in right now.
I'm definitely not surprised. I feel part of it has to do with the fact that it touches people. And when it touches people, you want to make sure that you minimize risk as much as possible that something goes wrong. And I feel this is one of those moments where there's still a lot of unknowns of how good will it really be and what will it do that is positive versus what is negative. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of new things that are coming out. There's a lot of hype. And I feel the people leader position in particular is one where time is very, very rare. And therefore time to train train and to learn new things and to be curious isn't really there. Now, I'm a member of several HR people leader groups across not just the VC ecosystem, but more generally. It's the number one topic. Everybody's talking about it because their board members are talking about it, their CEOs are talking about it, their business leaders are talking about it. But it's harder to implement than it is to imagine. And I think, as I said, there's one company I can think of in Europe right now that is really publicly talking about everything they do. One of the reasons why they were able to do it, or two reasons. One was that they said, we already had the foundations in place. Right? We were always data-driven and we were always technology first. And we always thought about how can we challenge ourselves and make things easier. So adoption was incredibly high when we started coming in with new pilots because people were just excited to do that. And I think that isn't necessarily the norm in every organization. And so for some, it will take them longer to learn and some it will take them longer to take the organization on the journey.
Interesting. We could talk, I want to talk about that, but I'm going to get us back on track here. And so if you flip the perspective or if you apply the founder lens, let's look through that. Similar to Daniel and I having this new superpower, like, are you seeing there new ways that founders are using Gen AI to reduce time? Like we were talking before, so many things to do, not enough time. Any thoughts or experience there?
I'm definitely hearing more and more people who really think about how do I leverage AI to cut down on the manual or more process-oriented tasks so that I can free up time to do more added value tasks. So I was chatting to somebody the other day who said like they reduced by 30% the time they spent on really synthesizing meetings, thinking about what comes next, like planning all the steps by using a couple of AI tools. And it's just taken that time away. And that time is now spent on meeting customers, thinking about new product development. And so I think it's a shift of what of your time do you actually spend on the things that will create great value versus the things that had to get done that you can now almost outsource to a certain extent to AI. And then it depends on the focus they have, right? Customer success or customer service, marketing, auditing. Like there's a lot of functions where the use of AI will just increase productivity incrementally and where you might not need to hire as many people as quickly and you can put this headcount somewhere else. And because that's our prediction. We're not saying that companies will necessarily have fewer people. There will be some, but they might have a different type of employee. They might be able to hire somebody in sales who's faster going to market because they know exactly where to go because they leverage their AI to predict here are the customers you can convert more quickly.
And so you mentioned a couple of times a company in Europe that's been sharing their, I guess, journey, their AI journey. Are you able to share what company that is?
I can't share what company that is, but you can quickly find out if you Google it.
Got it. Okay, yeah, Steven in the notes, put a company name down. I think I can figure it out. I guess, what's a first step that you would generally recommend for companies? I know it really depends on, what goals they have, but like for some of the best HR leaders that you've worked with or, you've partnered with, where do they usually start? Like what's a good first step?
In terms of building the people function or?
Building like an AI strategy for the people function.
I think the first step is learning about it. So the ones that I've seen incredibly, either they were in an organization with a founder and a founding team who were also thinking about it. This is a business problem. This is not a people problem or not a marketing problem, or it's really a collective, like how do you learn the fastest? So how do you connect to the right people who can teach you what the different tools are and how to use them, what the risks are? In the HR groups, they're all talking about it. So there's specific events, they're coming together in kind of dinners. They're starting to figure out, okay, what have you done that has worked? And then they kind of figure out how do we pilot that and how do we go from there? I think those are the big ones. And then also looking into the tools that they're already using, especially if it's a more scaled business. Chances are a lot of the tools are available in some of the suites and customer engagements you have with your companies that supply you the technology you use in HR or elsewhere.
That's consistent with we talk to a lot of HR leaders, and what for me, like the Q3 2024 takeaways on the Gen AI transformation, first and foremost, you need a culture that embraces AI. And that's something that any and every company can do. Just philosophically looking at, okay, what would that mean to us having an AI culture and how do we package that and share that and start to reinforce the behaviors that we are looking for in creating a culture that embraces AI. That to me right now feels like if there's one priority that HR teams should be looking at, that is where I would be investing my time. And then as part of that, piloting certain things, going through an exercise where you're identifying the low-hanging fruit, because I think all HR teams have something that will deliver huge value to the team. I want to switch gears a little bit because there's just so many things that you guys have shared with us, one of which is an executive search framework. And another massive challenge for teams that are scaling is how do you bring on new leaders in a way that aligns with culture that you're trying to create, that may allow you to flex muscles by bringing in skills that the team currently doesn't have. And there's just so much to do. And these are usually big ticket investments for founders. And so walk us through the 14-point framework. So these are 14 points that you guys have found for that will result in successful executive searches. What are some of the key elements in nailing bringing an executive onto the team?
It's one of my biggest passion projects when I work with founders, especially at the beginning on helping them learn about what does a great search look like and how do you work with a search partner. It's also very difficult, right? Especially at the beginning when you're starting out and they don't all go right, which is frustrating to say the least. But for me, the things that is probably overlooked the most is like setting up the search in the right way. And that is figuring out what are your priorities? What are you really hiring for? What are the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves? Thinking through who needs to be involved in the recruitment process early on and making sure that they commit the time to this, and then going out to market and figuring out who's the right partner with us. And so those three things, I think a lot of organizations and founders spend not enough time up front to set it up in the right way. So I always encourage founders to meet several people who are already in the role that they're hiring for before they even start with a conversation with an executive search consultant, because it helps them figure out what kind of CFO do I need? What kind of skill set do I want to bring on board? What does our culture actually look like, especially as we're going out for the first time, hiring somebody who's big from the outside and who's probably a couple of years ahead as well in their career? What are we looking for to bring into this organization? How are we going to do that? Then when you go to meet the different search firms, and they all do different, like similar process, but different in their who they are, it's like figure out who are the ones who will be honest advisors. And that means they might not be comfortable all the time. It might not be the most fun conversation you have, because their role really is for me twofold. One is they tell your story in the market. And so you have to be comfortable with them being able to do that well. So you have to spend time figuring out, can they craft my story? Can they tell it in a way where it amplifies who we are as an employer and who we want to be? Can they translate that into the right candidates? But you also have to figure out is like, are they going to tell me the truth? Are they going to challenge me and push me when we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing? And will they take feedback well when we feel like they're not doing? So it's a true partnership. So for me, that is like the most important thing of everything, because things will get tricky and things will be, difficult. The founders I've seen like leverage search firms the best is they think incredibly creatively about the kind of people they want to bring on board. So they don't come with a list of here's exactly everything I need. They tell the story about the skill set and, like we talked about earlier, the spikes that they will bring to the executive team. And they think quite far ahead. They don't necessarily want somebody who's really successful right now, but they really start thinking about what does the future look like, and they're therefore open for someone who might be a step-up candidate or is doing it for the first time. They really also manage their board through the executive search process in a way where there's like almost a passive candidate flow that comes in from the sidelines that keeps the bar very high. I had a search consultant call me the other day and tell me that they want to search in our portfolio, but they were almost afraid to kick it off because they knew we were probably introducing 3 or 4 people as we were speaking. And so they had to run very hard at the beginning to catch up. And then the last part, and I think that one is really important. I think a lot of people underestimate the value of reference taking themselves, and particularly in the context of if I want to get the best out of this person, like tell me what I need to do, what do I need to watch out? So almost use it as an onboarding guide and getting to know the person, and then thinking about the onboarding. Like the hiring doesn't stop when the person signs. That's when the hard part starts, and it takes about a year and a half for them to be really effective in an organization. They will have wins before, but it takes some time. So figuring out how you continuously dedicate the time to those things, I think, is really important, which is why we recommend no more than 2 big exec hires per year. You can't absorb them. You can't really spend the time on it in the right way. And then having the team come together takes a lot of work as well.
As you were walking through this this framework, or some of the steps, it reminded me of one of my favorite episodes that we've ever done, and that was with Brandon Samet and Wade Foster from Zapier. And just hearing the story about how they hired Brandon, I might be misremembering parts of the story, but if I remember correctly, Wade recognized that it was time for them to bring on a chief people officer. He didn't really know the job description should look like for that role, so he started just reaching out to dream chief people officers and getting their take on like what should be on this job description. And through that process, he met Brandon. And I think part of like the interview process, they shared 360 feedback with each other they had received from their team. I think Wade like shared, recordings from their all hands meetings. He was like, yeah, if you go on Glassdoor, we have these amazing reviews, but that's not the full picture. Like that's the good. Here's some of the ugly. So there's no surprises when you join. So I just had to point that out. Like I was getting flashbacks to this Brandon and Wade story.
I think the anti-sell for me is one of the most powerful conversations you should have with every executive you hire. Is like where you really, really hard try to convince them that they shouldn't join your business for these and these reasons. Because when they then say yes, they know there's no surprises. Like they know what they're walking into and they chose it. And it makes a really different experience. Like the other thing, people often underestimate, particularly for dual career couples and people who have families, the impact a holistic recruitment approach can have. So I have one of our founders who is well known to take the entire family out and to get to know the entire family, not just the person they're hiring, but to get to know their interests. And he's been known to go on hikes with family members to kind of also tell them about what it will feel like when their spouse joins the company and what they're trying to achieve. So there's ways of engaging that are larger than just the person that you're hiring.
Just a quick time check. Are we good? Okay. I saw Lewis come on and I was like, oh no. Okay. And no worries, Lewis. We'll pretend that no one will ever see that happen. Just going back to the 14 points of the framework, is there one that is most often overlooked or like one of the steps that is, I guess, dismissed, not for any malicious reason, but it's just something that intuitively is tough for founders? Anything that you can call out there?
The open dialogue with the search partner. Like really honest, open dialogue, I think is often overlooked and the value of it. And the best searches I can witness is like it really is happening where it's quick. It's not waiting for a call to happen or to be scheduled. The commitment from the founder to spend the time in the recruitment process is real. So there's no waiting 2 weeks for feedback or trying to schedule something that's now 4 weeks out. Like there's a real understanding that the best talent is not just waiting around for this founder to come along. And so that having that dialogue and figuring out, okay, where are we going? Where are we failing? Why aren't candidates interested in our role? Like, what are we not doing well? And adapting rapidly and learning from it. I think that's the best thing you can do to make the search successful.
And just curious, it sounds like you're a proponent of using an external search firm. Like I would have, and is that correct?
Depends on the stage and depends on the founder. There's certain roles for which, particularly if you're hiring in a very competitive market, like right now, I still think it's possible for somebody who is a founder in an incredibly interesting AI space to hire the best engineers themselves because their story will be interesting. But if you don't know how to tell your story, or if it's an incredibly competitive market and there's a small candidate pool of people who could really do it, and you want to make sure that that story gets told the best way, I think that's a great way to hire a recruiter. It also frees up some of your time because if you think about the sourcing, the filtering, the figuring out, is somebody actually good, and moving them through the process, there's a lot of work that happens before they come into for an interview that a search consultant can take off. But I wouldn't say everybody needs to use only search firms and not for everything. I find that when, especially at that messy middle, going with those who are specialized and really know their networks well can really accelerate things. So a lot of times I will point people towards somebody who's a real expert in their field and has domain expertise and can bring the right candidates quickly.
Yeah, and that was going to be my follow-up question. Like, how do you find the right search firm for your company? And it sounds like you're really just trying to find, firms that are specialized in one specific area.
Yes and no. I mean, we really, you're only as good as your last search as a search consultant. So sometimes you had a bad search and people say like, shouldn't hire them. I don't believe in that. I think every search is a new start. Like you really have to figure out how do you build up the resilience as a search consultant to keep going, because there's a lot of things that are out of your control, and you need to kind of continuously bring people. I often ask, like, one of the search firms I see doing exceptional work is like, there's a relentlessness in making sure that the founders see the best candidates until the last second. So there's no kind of like tapering off of candidates coming in. They're not overwhelming them with them, but they will continue to say like, hey, we met somebody else who we think is actually excellent, even if they're almost at offer stage already. So there's like continuously bringing people there. The honesty of saying like, we're good for the search or we're not the right partner. I think that's something that we often look for. And then we try to make introductions where we think that the two people will get along. Because it is, you got to put your trust in the other person on both sides. And so you not everybody likes every style. And so we try to match as much as we can. And then we tell founders as well, like, pick the one where you really feel like either they're going to push me or I feel like those are the ones who will represent us the best. And that's a really personal decision.
So one thing that comes to mind for me, and, I've never been an executive at a Series B startup. I've only been, an individual contributor, and I've, been there at the company when they've gone through this transition where they're bringing on a new executive. And I feel like, for people all the way at the bottom, like me, it's like pretty clear when the company like got the hire wrong. Like maybe like on paper, it's the perfect person, but you can just feel that it's not the right person. And I don't know, like if I were a CEO looking to hire a CFO or a CTO, that would be like my number one concern. Like I want to hire this person fast, but how do I get this right? Like how can I like balance, the need for speed with finding somebody that's the right cultural fit? Like what's your biggest advice there?
Well, and just to add on to Daniel's point, I have seen a lot of particularly chief revenue officers and chief marketing officers. It's like, and and usually they come in to like shake things up. And so that just to kind of pinpoint even further, like I've experienced the same thing Daniel has. So curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no magic solution and no magic one. I think if we had that, all people leaders would be happy. The more time you think about what will happen once you make the hire, not just making the hire, I think the easier it also gets with figuring out like how do you bring the person inside the organization and bring the organization on the journey. Because if you're hiring for people who will be thinking 2 years ahead, you might not see why this is the right person right now. There are domains, chief people officer and chief marketing officer is probably the two roles where you have the least tenure in roles. And that's for two reasons for me. The chief people officer is very evident because you are the person who has the hardest job in the organization, because you need to hold everything that has to do with people. And you need to hold everything that has to do with a founder, the founding team, the executive team, and do like multiple roles in one. And it's in an incredibly demanding environment. I mean, if you think about the last 5 years, it's probably the hardest the majority of chief people officers have ever had to face. And I'm eternally grateful for all of those who want to do it again and want to go again. On the culture piece, I think that is the biggest, and I don't know whether we want to talk culture or we want to talk values or non-negotiables, but I think that's the biggest piece where I see founders not always spend enough time figuring out, like, is this person actually somebody who will challenge and stretch our culture, but not come in and have a grenade go off and destroy it? And if that happens, which it will, like everybody gets hires wrong. Like I've gotten hires wrong in my career. Everybody gets it wrong. It's just the wrong organization at the wrong time for the person. Be decisive. Like learn from it, be decisive and act on it rather than letting it drag out for a very long time.
Love all of that. But we're close. We're nearing the end. It's just amazing how quickly the time goes. I want to shift, and we'll probably wrap up our conversation with a focus on organizational design. One of the things that Daniel and I have, this is rooted in Huertonomics, so we don't have a special data set that we can pull from, but a huge determinant in how a company views its people function, its HR function, is rooted in how the CEO, him or herself, views HR and the people function. And so in order to be open to a lot of the, I guess, emerging practices in HR, and I would put OD as something that kind of it's not a new practice, but I think the importance of OD up front and revisiting your organizational design often is growing in kind of importance place on it. And so when you guys are looking for founders or looking to make investments, I'm just curious, is something that you try to get a feel for? How do you suss that out? Like whether or not the CEO believes that HR is hiring and firing, or the CEO truly believes that the most important asset are the people that are going to do the great work, that are going to achieve the great results. So what does that look like?
I'd say the latter is probably like the driving force behind most of what index investors are spending their time on, is figuring out not just, is this a founder who has a great idea and who maybe has the technical chops to do what they want to do, but how do they view and value talent? How do they learn? How do they challenge themselves? And that's definitely something that we put a lot of value on and spend a lot of time with founders as they're growing throughout their career as well as a founder, and as they're progressing and scaling their business, is like, how do they adapt to all of these different changes? Most of them don't come out and say like, I don't like HR or I do like HR. It's more like in conversations where you find out like, how do they recognize excellence? And will this be a person who will attract the best people and will be able to surround themselves by the best people? And have they done that before? And if not, how do they think about it? So we often think about this. We obviously are very integrated. Like it's really a one team approach at Index. So there's a lot of conversations that also happen about how do we help some founders who might be going through a challenging time solve some of the issues, and how can we provide access to the right people? One thing I would say, and I know you guys have seen this, but we've created a tool that is based on scaling through chaos. It's called Team Plan. One of the things we often heard from our chief people officers and people leaders is like, we just don't have the data. I just don't know what to respond when my CTO comes and says, I now need to double my headcount, and I can't really tell them whether that's right or not. So Team Plan, which is available on our website for free, basically gives you all of that data for the 210 companies we looked at for the first 1,000 employees, and helps you benchmark like, what's the optimum ratio between the engineers and PMs, or between my AEs and SEs if I'm an enterprise business? Should we consider marketing and comms hire? And it doesn't mean you have to follow the same thing, but you can choose your benchmark and you can reduce it down. I think you need a minimum of 7 companies. You can reduce it down to 7 companies that you say, like, we really want to kind of follow what they've done, and it's continuously will be updated in the future. And then you can think about, okay, how about like when did we start hiring the first chiefs, and what actually happens to the co-founders and their roles, and when does marketing become more important than sales for certain companies? And you can do that for consumer and B2B. So I definitely think for the first time there's a tool out there that is really practical. I mean, we've seen a couple of examples of non-portfolio companies in board meetings using a screenshot from the benchmarking they've done, where the people leaders were able to explain, we're doing something wrong, we should pause and we should have a look at our organizational size, because this is what the data shows us. So let's have a conversation. And it's a starter for that conversation.
So going back to that, the Zapier conversation we had with Wade and Brandon, something else that Wade said like in the last minute of the episode was that he thinks that here in the next 5-10 years, we'll see the first ever one-person billion-dollar company. And a lot of that he thinks will be because of all of the tools like ChatGPT. Just simple tools like that. I'm sure there's going to be way more advanced tools that come out here in the next few years. How do you think, I guess like I have 2 parts of this question. How do you think that impacts the way that companies are designed in the future? And are y'all planning on collecting a new data set here in the next like 10, 15 years to see how it's changed?
We definitely are looking into the new data sets already. It's a bit early. There's more anecdotes rather than really seeing it. We looked at the first 1,000 employees, right? So we have to figure out, how do we do that? If there's only going to be one employee, it's going to be a very, very different kind of advice. On a very personal level, as you can tell, I love people. I love hearing their stories. I love talking to them. I love the diversity. I love the team aspect as well of doing something and building something together. So my hope is that there will still be a lot of companies that will scale way beyond the 1,000 and will grow in businesses. I also think for society that will be a much better impact where we have meaningful work that we can go to every day. But it's definitely going to shift the conversation, and people need to start thinking about it. It's luckily for me a bit early for that. So let's see what the next decade or so brings.
It's really a frightening thought for me, Wade, that thought exercise that Wade dropped on us. But I do believe in the power of connections. And like part of this, I feel like is as humans, having purpose and why we're connecting and why we're working and creating. And so I totally share that. And I also hope that you do collect data on the 200 and when you have, or like, the 200 companies that you have, and when hopefully it is less than 10 years from now and you can come on the show and share that with us, because we are at that time where we have to turn the corner and wrap things up. Before we do that, however, I want to how do I learn more? Is the data points, the information that we've been referencing today, is it accessible? And if I want to access this information, how can I get to it?
The easiest way is if you go on the Index Ventures website under Index Press, you will find all of our tools, resources, insights there. You can get a downloaded copy of the book within seconds and a couple of clicks, similarly for the app. And so it's very easy to use and accessible to everybody.
Amazing. Well, with that said, the next segment is what we call rapid fire questions. It's the same set of questions we ask every guest. You ready for this?
I am ready.
All right, great. First question. If you could go back in time and talk to a 22-year-old you, what career advice would you give yourself and why?
At 22, I was in that phase where I was having to decide what job do I take, and I did not listen to my gut. And I think if I went back, I would tell myself, listen to your instincts and try and figure out what they're trying to tell you. I watched, I'm sure many of you have, Randy Pau's The Last Lecture, when I was about 26 or 27, when he was talking about brick walls are there for a reason. They tell you how badly you want something. I wish I had known that at 22. I think I would have run in a couple more brick walls very early on rather than stopping.
That's great advice. All right, next question. If you could fix any HR or people problem with a magic wand, what would it be and why?
For me, the people function is probably the least understood function in an organization because it is so hard and so complex. And so if I could really have a magic wand, I would do two things. I would enable everybody in the organization to understand that people-related matters are everybody's business, not a department's business, and to have a real appreciation for the value that function creates. And if I could have a really big magic wand, I would want more people going into the people function, like different backgrounds, different perspectives, to also experience how difficult it is to be in that role and to come with new ideas and to try things differently. I think it's the role I probably worry about the most for the future of where people will come from. We see a lot of exits. And so I hope there's going to be an influx and people recognizing that this is something everybody should learn.
Love that last point. More people, more ambitious and smart and curious people, to enter the HR function. Last question. When you look around the corner to the end of 2024 and beyond, what do you see coming next for the future of work?
Unfortunately, more complexity than ever before. I think people functions have had to figure out how to run a remote workforce and a hybrid workforce, and now have to figure out how to bring people back, how to think about promotions, how to create the diversity that you want. And at the same time, a ton of opportunities, whether that is leveraging technology and AI, whether that is really strengthening talent pools because there are more and more people who have gone on interesting scaling journeys who want to do it again and who want to grow, or whether that is accessing very remote talent in parts of the world where maybe traditionally you haven't hired because now you have the tools and resources to be able to do that. So I think it's also very exciting to be in 2024 and looking around the corner.
I agree. Yeah. 2025 is going to be a great year. I know it's only September, but I feel like we're going to be there before you know it. Who do we need to bring onto the show next? Are there any people leaders that are either a part of the portfolio that you really admire or people that maybe you follow on LinkedIn? Like, who needs to be heard on the Modern People Leader next?
I'll give you two people leaders and I'll give you two professors because I was thinking about like who would I want to hear about more. So on the professor side, I don't think they have been on the podcast. Erin Meyer, who is an INSEAD professor and author of The Culture Map, which I believe in this world today that is so interconnected and so global, everybody should read to really understand different cultures, cross-cultural communication, and see all the mistakes you could have avoided if you had kind of gotten this tool set before. And Jennifer Petriglieri, who's also an INSEAD professor, and who I believe is the only person who has done research and published a book on dual career couples, which is something that a lot of people leaders, I think, need to think about when you're hiring and trying to attract great candidates. It's a book called Couples That Work. Both of them are incredible, and I think they deserve a platform to be heard more widely. On the people leaders, and again, you might have had them, Katarina Burke at Spotify, I think is I'm a huge fan of, has done really interesting things. And in our portfolio, there's too many to choose from. I think Remote has an interesting story. I would actually get somebody like Gjob, the founder of Remote, to get him to tell the story of why he was so frustrated with not being able to hire the right engineers around the world for his team, that he set up his own company to kind of have an HR problem that he solved.
All of those are great recommendations, and we would be honored to have any and all of them on the show. So we'll definitely reach out. And thank you for that, Sandra. Well, we've officially done it. We are at the end. We have one last tradition on the show. We call it one word or phrase close. So it could be a single word, a few words, whatever feels right. And we all just respond with the way we want to wrap this amazing conversation up. And we prefer for our guests to go first. So Sandra.
I'm happy to go first. For me, it would be keep surfing on the edge of chaos. That's how you create great companies.
I was writing mine down in the background. Mine's almost the exact same, but slightly different. I'm surfing on the edge of chaos. These last few weeks at the Modern People Leader, I know it's just the two of us, but it's like chaotic, but also like great. I don't know. That's how I'm feeling right now.
It's an interesting feeling, and it's cool to share that with my first cousin once removed, because it's a cool thing to do on your own, but it's even cooler to do it with your family. And I'm going to go with energized. Like, it's a short week. I had the Sunday scaries on Monday night because we had a holiday weekend, and what a great way to, we rarely start our weeks with a morning podcast, and it's been a great one. I've just really enjoyed this conversation, Sandra. So thank you so much. Thank you for being patient with us, because this is a long time coming, but we did it, and it's really been an amazing time. So thank you.
Same here. Thank you for inviting me. This is fabulous.
I hope you'll come join us again sometime. Okay, cool. All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye, guys. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.